Do you know those specific quiet moments that manage to sneak up on you when you least expect them? The ones that don't arrive with the roar of fireworks or the loud fanfare of a parade, but instead slip silently into the fabric of your life, subtly shifting everything you thought you knew. This is one of those very stories. My name is Emily, and I'm about to share the journey of how a stubborn, floppy-eared donkey transformed into my greatest life lesson and the most incredible adventure I have ever experienced. To understand how it started, you have to picture a dusty, sweltering summer afternoon in a small, quiet town in Colorado. The mountains stood like eternal guards on the far horizon, while the heavy, nostalgic scent of sun-baked wood and dry hay hung thick in the air. At 17, I was restless, convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that nothing truly exciting would ever happen in my mundane life. My dad and I had wandered almost aimlessly into an old farm auction. You know the scene: farmers in worn caps bidding on heavy tractors, families haggling over leather saddles, and the auctioneer's rhythmic voice rising and falling like a strange, hypnotic kind of music. I wasn't searching for anything in particular. I certainly wasn't looking for him. But then, tucked away at the edge of the yard, tied to a weathered, splintering post, stood the scruffiest and most unimpressive donkey I had ever laid eyes on. His gray coat was patchy and rough to the touch. His hooves looked as though they had never once seen the care of a farrier. His ears were so incredibly long that they drooped like tired, heavy curtains over his face. But his eyes, those deep, liquid brown eyes, held a depth I couldn't quite put a name to. Was it wisdom? Was it a profound sadness? Or perhaps just a story waiting for someone to listen? While the sleek, powerful horses were sold off in mere seconds, and the wagons and tools were snatched up by eager bidders, that little donkey just stood there waiting. He was invisible to the crowd, looking as though he had already accepted the fact that nobody wanted him. In that moment, my heart clenched with a sudden, sharp empathy. I looked at my dad, and he read my expression instantly. That's the beautiful thing about dads who truly know your soul. He just smiled that particular smile that already holds a yes inside it. "If you want him," he said in a quiet, supportive voice, "let's bring him home." And just like that, Charlie walked into my life. Now let me tell you a truth about donkeys that the movies usually gloss over. They are stubborn. I'm talking Olympic-level, world-class stubbornness. Charlie would frequently stop dead in the sigh, middle of a trail, plant his hooves as if they were professionally welded to the earth, and simply refuse to budge an inch. Not for the sweetest apples, not for gentle coaxing, and not for any threat. One day he would devour carrots like they were a delicacy, and the next day he'd stare at those same carrots as if I were offering him lethal poison. Leading him anywhere felt less like a stroll and more like negotiating an intense peace treaty with the world's most determined and unwavering diplomat. But somewhere between the endless standoffs, the daily feeding battles, and the moments when I genuinely wanted to scream in frustration, something fundamental shifted. A bond began to form. Quiet, unspoken, and eventually unbreakable. One evening, as I watched the sunset paint the Colorado sky in shades of pink and orange that seemed impossible, a wild, daring thought struck me. "Dad," I said, trying to maintain a casual tone despite my racing heart. "What if Charlie and I went on a journey? I mean, a real, honest-to-goodness adventure?" My dad let out a warm, rumbling laugh. "Emily, you and Charlie on an adventure? You'd better pack twice the amount of patience and at least 3 times the snacks." But then his face grew serious. He told me that sometimes the best journeys are the ones we don't overthink, the ones we stumble into that eventually teach us everything we need to know about ourselves. So, I began to prepare with a newfound purpose. I packed a canvas bag with water bottles, dried fruit, a journal, a warm blanket, and a heavy stash of apples for Charlie. I had no maps, no GPS, and no rigid plan. It was an act of pure trust. The morning we departed, the sky blazed in gold, looking as though it were cheering us on. Charlie stood beside me, his long ears twitching, and for the first time, I felt certain he knew something momentous was about to happen. We followed winding forest trails beneath towering ancient pines and crossed meadows so vibrant with wildflowers, they looked like a masterpiece of spilled paint. We moved slowly, so incredibly slowly, because that is simply Charlie's speed. Gradually, the realization hit me that the slow pace was the entire point. Life doesn't always have to be a frantic rush to a destination. On the second day, we encountered a shallow river. The water was rushing fast over smooth, slippery stones. I thought it would be an easy crossing, but Charlie had other ideas. He stopped, planted his hooves, and shook his head. He was absolutely not moving. I tugged, I pleaded, and I tried to bargain. Nothing worked. Exhausted and frustrated, I collapsed on the riverbank with tears stinging my eyes. Then I remembered my dad's words: patience and trust. So, I waited. An hour crawled by, then another. Finally, Charlie edged forward. One cautious hoof tested the water, then another. Step by careful step, he crossed. In that moment, I learned something profound. Progress isn't always about pushing harder. Sometimes it's about waiting and letting things unfold in their own time. Throughout our travels, we met the most wonderful people. There was a family camping by a creek who shared fresh bread and asked if their young son could ride Charlie. He carried that child with such incredible gentleness, as if he understood the weight of his precious passenger. I met an elderly woman on a porch who once owned a donkey named Sam. "Donkeys aren't stubborn, dear," she told me with a twinkle in her eye. "They're careful. They think before they leap." That single sentence changed my entire perspective. The nights were pure magic. I'd spread my blanket under a sky so densely, crammed with stars they almost seemed to hum with energy. Charlie would rest nearby, his silhouette turned to silver by the moonlight. I'd whisper my deepest worries and biggest dreams to him. Things too large or too small to tell anyone else. He never answered in words, of course, but the soft flick of his ears and the way he'd shift closer felt like he was truly listening. There was one evening after a particularly brutal hike when everything in my body ached. My feet were sore, my shoulders were tired, and my hope was fading. I sat down and wondered why I had ever started this journey. As the tears began to fall, Charlie nudged me from behind, gentle but firm. When I turned, he was staring at me with those calm, steady eyes. It was as if he were saying, "Don't give up now. We are in this together." That simple gesture saved my spirit. Days eventually melted into weeks. My journal became a treasure chest of sketches, stories, and lessons tucked inside ordinary moments. By the time we finally ambled back into our small town, I was no longer the restless girl who had led a reluctant donkey away from an auction. I was steadier, quieter, and more deeply rooted. Charlie had taught me the art of patience, the trails had taught me the necessity of endurance, and the strangers we met had taught me the beauty of gratitude. Neighbors gathered in astonishment as we returned. My dad hugged me tight and patted Charlie like an old, dear friend. "Looks like you two wrote a story no one else could," he grinned. Even now, many years later, whenever I hear a distant bray or see a donkey grazing in a field, I smile. I carry the lessons of that journey with me every single day. Companionship doesn't always arrive in the form you expect. Sometimes it has long, drooping ears, a world-class stubborn streak, and a heart loyal enough to walk every single step beside you. The most heartwarming part wasn't the miles or the sights. It was the quiet, unbreakable bond that taught us, step by steady step, what it really means to move forward together. Sometimes the most life-changing adventures start with the smallest yes. Mine started with a donkey nobody wanted, and he changed my world forever.